U.S. Education Secretary Miguel Cardona is criticizing Florida Governor Ron DeSantis over his executive order prohibiting school districts from adopting mask policies. Cardona sent a letter to DeSantis and the Florida Commissioner of Education saying he was, quote, deeply concerned about the order. He also criticized state leadership for threatening to withhold money from school districts and not using federal COVID relief funds as intended. In the letter, Cardona made it clear his department stands with educators who are working to safely reopen schools and maintain safe in-person instruction. Now, to talk more about this, I'd like to bring in Nicole Carr. She's a reporter for ProPublica's South Bureau. Nicole, thank you for taking the time. You're based out of Georgia. You're facing a similar situation with your children's schools. Can you explain what's happening in Cobb County?
Yeah, well, Cobb County is one of the few districts here in the core metro Atlanta area that did not reinstate the mask mandate as we began to see high transmission in our community. And as the public health officials from the state's top doctor on down to the county health director said that kids needed to be masked in the schools considering our transmission rates and what we were dealing with here. So we thought that maybe after the CDC had put out their guidance and we began to see Atlanta Public Schools, Fulton County, Douglas County, Gwinnett County, the state's largest school district, as we began to see them put these mask mandates in place, we thought perhaps that would happen here in Cobb, which is the second largest school district in Georgia. And it did not. What put some parents like ourselves in such a sticky situation was that we were asked to choose whether we were headed back to school or opting into the virtual learning space. We were asked to choose that back in May when the situation was very different. Low transmission, low case count, no Delta variant. And we made that decision to send the kids back. And the option was closed and would not reopen as we began to see a very different COVID come through our community.
So as a parent, you're forced with, the tough decision of what to do with your children when it comes to something as important as their education. How did you react when you found out the school district lifted its mask mandate, and what did you do?
We were in a position where we didn't know where our school would sway. Perhaps we would walk into the open house and see that most of the teachers and administrators and families would choose to mask. Maybe we wouldn't. We just didn't know what the case was. We knew our options were closed. So we gave it a shot. We said, let's just go check it out and see what happens. And in the piece, it opens up with open house and what we saw and why it wasn't a good fit for our family. Not only because we didn't see enough masking and we were not comfortable with that, but because there was a policy in place that no one was to ask one way or another about the choices, the personal choices that people were making, from the teachers on down to the families. And so that was made clear that this was non-negotiable. We're not talking about it, but also that this virtual option was closed. And so that's when I had to kick it into high gear to find an alternate solution for the kids and luck up on lottery spots and move them. But it was tough. You've introduced them to this. They want to get back to school. Our kids hadn't been back since March 2020. Wow. You want them back in that space, but the space has to come with conditions for many families.
Cobb County, of course, stretches from the Atlanta metro area to, far out to the outskirts of Atlanta. A wide range of opinions, I'm sure, on this topic. What are you hearing from other parents about all of this?
We talk to other parents and you hear from two mothers who don't share the views that I share. You hear from them in the piece here. And what they were saying, and you even see the initial discord in our own household, what they were saying, what my husband was saying initially was that, hey, I'm not seeing the data saying that this is affecting kids in a way that should make us pull them out of school yet. And while I understood where the data point stood in late July, we also understood that Delta variant was evolving, that we were changing our behavior, and that a combination of these things on top of the high transmission was perhaps a reason for us to pause and say, hey, is this the best thing to do? In the 2 weeks that the children have been back to school, we've seen the highest positivity rate in the state for the K through 12 age children, just over 25% for 12 to 17-year-olds, and just over 20% positivity rate for the 5-year-olds to 11-year-olds. And we've seen 569 new cases emerge in our district since last week. And we've seen parents grapple with this decision that if we're not moving in the way that we feel comfortable, where do I go? And so I have neighbors who are interviewing in private schools or pulling out special needs children at this time because they're kind of locked in a position where there's no choice to opt out of that space. So there's also discourse that is disheartening for our community because our kids are seeing this. You see the images on TV all day, the protests, the yelling back and forth in front of the children about whether I have a freedom of choice or what you can do with my children. And it impacts them to see us in this discourse, to have this type of attitude toward one another. So it's even beyond the school space. It's like what's happening with my parents, my neighbors, and how we handle this and move forward.
Yeah, certainly it's important to remember that at the center of this are kids, and kids potentially without a choice whether or not to get vaccinated. You know, they're at the core of all this. After the school year started, the district emailed parents about updating their COVID guidelines. Can you explain those changes, and do you as a parent feel that that's enough?
Well, the update was that masks were now strongly encouraged, but still optional. And the update was really to the quarantine policy. The state's top doctor signed off on an order that allowed the school districts to craft their own quarantine policies outside of the CDC's recommendations if the point of exposure was at the school. And so what Cobb County chose to do was say, if you have been exposed, you can come back to school the next day as long as you stay masked and you're asymptomatic, and it's for 10 days. And no one addressed that the point of exposure and the caseload we were beginning to see, it didn't happen from the kids being together in school for 1 week. It came from what we brought into the schools from summer vacation. And so there was no responsibility to really contact trace and determine where that point of contact was. And if it was outside of the school, we may or may not notify you. And so it became confusing. And I think that's where the fallout is here. On top of different policies all around us in the same high transmission areas, we're not crafting similar policies that can be explained. We don't know who crafts them. They're not in line with what the public health officials are putting out. So who are calling the shots, and who's calling the shots in all of this? And you read in the piece, we asked the district this repeatedly. We can't get an answer on how you're coming up with this. Why is it okay to go back to school after you've been exposed with no requirement for testing? It's just like, hey, if you feel good, you can come back. Just wear a mask, but masks are optional, and we can't ask you about it if you take it off when you're in school. So, we have policies we've never seen before.
Sure.
We have cases all over the place. There's a lot going on that's confusing for folks.
Nicole Carr, still lots to figure out, that's for sure. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.